in Deutschland kommen und muss sagen, den Frieden wollen wir. Ruinieren.
Meet Adolf Hitler, the new Fuhrer of Germany. In January 1933, Hitler finally gained the position of Chancellor. Although technically the second most powerful position in Germany, Hitler was within reach of gaining complete control over the country. Immediately, he secured President Paul von Hindenburg's assent for new elections, but on the 27th of February 1933 the Reichstag was burned down, supposedly by a Dutch communist Marinus van der Lubbe. Years later, most historians believe that this was most likely the work of the Nazis using a convenient scapegoat. Reports at the time suggest that the young Dutchman entered court with slurred speech and odd movements, which would suggest he was drugged into admitting his crime. Regardless of the truth, the final free election in Germany 1 week later saw the Nazi Party win 43% of the vote, giving them complete control over the Reichstag. On March 23rd, Hitler used his power to pass the Enabling Act, with support from other nationalist and conservative parties. With these new powers, he banned all non-Nazi organizations, including trade unions. Cleverly, Hitler tempered the risk of a counter-revolution from Germany's conservative religious groups by forging a concordat with the Vatican that July. With that, Hitler accomplished one of his key promises. I set for myself one aim, to sweep these 30 parties out of Germany. But Hitler's goals were not to remove every element of German society to begin from year zero. Unlike the communist revolution in Russia, Hitler wasn't a hardcore revolutionary like many believe. He understood the need to keep conservative movements in the fold if he hoped to be the next president and retain the support of the army. He'd learned the lessons from the failed revolutions of the previous decade that had failed to obtain broad support. Likewise, he was content to allow large German industrialists to continue operating in the same vein as before, as long as they served the new National Socialist regime. But Hitler's strategic move revealed fractures in his own party for the first time. In particular, Ernst Röhm, the head of the SA, believed the revolution must continue. He even possessed grand ideas of his SA thugs replacing the regular German army. To Hitler, though, this was not a time for revolution but consolidation. In July 1933, Hitler told a gathering of officials that the stream of revolution has been undammed, but it must be channeled into the secure bed of evolution. This gave the opportunity for Röhm's enemies to strike, with Heinrich Himmler and Hermann Göring being among the biggest proponents for removing Röhm. Hitler did his best to convince Röhm of his policies, failing to show the ruthlessness that would define his later rule. Was it loyalty or something else? History doesn't say. But on June 29, 1934, Hitler initiated the Night of the Long Knives. In one bloody night, Hitler removed practically all of his opponents inside and outside the party. This included Röhm and von Kahr, the man who had been responsible for sending Hitler to prison after the failed 1923 beer hall putsch. With the breaking of the SA, Hitler finally won the full confidence of the regular army, and it was this fact that further opened the way for the Nazis to take complete control of Germany. The year 1934 saw further successes for the Nazis. In August of that year, President Hindenburg finally died. This fortuitous moment saw Hitler merge the offices of the Chancellor and President. Not only did this make Hitler the ultimate political power in Germany, but it also gave him the title of Supreme Command of the Armed Forces of the Reich. Now soldiers no longer swore an oath to Germany, they swore an oath to Hitler personally. But for all Hitler's popularity, he still needed to cement his power, and that also came quickly as the world saw increased economic growth throughout much of the mid-1930s. Various Nazi initiatives crushed unemployment and accelerated the economy. With an extra dose of police terror, a vote on Hitler's leadership resulted in a 90% approval rating. Today, it would be easy to assume that this vote was rigged. Although there were likely elements of vote rigging, the truth was Hitler was incredibly popular at this time. It's why he remains one of the few 20th century dictators who rose to power through a democratic vote. Although these successes may have resulted in Hitler's crowning glory, it's important to mention that he wasn't content with ruling Germany. Hitler had already laid out his plans for the German people in his 1925 book Mein Kampf. His moves merely set the stage for making Germany the foremost power in Europe and initiating his plans for conquest. In truth, Hitler largely delegated the running of Germany to his ministers. His brushstrokes were broad, and it was up to each individual department to handle the rest, and this was where Hitler's organizational skills excelled. Rather than giving each department a mandate, Hitler purposely made their authority overlap, forcing them to compete for his approval. It was this move that prevented them from ever challenging him. Instead, most of his attention focused on foreign policy. Ultimately, Hitler always intended to go to war. It was only a matter of readying the nation for that eventual showdown. But what were Hitler's goals and direction for Germany? We can sum up Hitler's ramblings and rantings in 2 points. 1. Hitler desired territories in the east to expand Germany's holdings and create living space. These territories covered Poland, the Baltics, Belarus, Ukraine, and parts of the Balkans, most of which consisted of the Soviet Union. In the process, the Slavic peoples, viewed as racially inferior, would be wiped out. 2. France must be crushed to take revenge for Germany's defeat and the humiliating Treaty of Versailles in World War I. In these goals, he saw fascist Italy under its dictator Mussolini as his natural ally. Plus, he also saw Britain as a potential ally as long as it accepted staying out of mainland Europe's affairs. Despite these dreams and his absolute authority over Germany, Hitler still had to contend with the terms of the Versailles Treaty, which still limited its army to 100,000 men, which was about the size of a small country. It was this gradual unraveling of the treaty that Hitler would dedicate himself for much of the 1930s. To achieve this end, he focused on portraying himself as the champion of Europe against the Bolshevik menace of the East. It was a clever ploy because all of Europe's great powers held the same fear. Germany's renewal played into the European belief that a strong Germany could serve Europe's aims as a bulwark against the growing might of the Soviet Union. He began his work in 1933 by withdrawing from the Disarmament Conference and the League of Nations, the previous incarnation of today's United Nations. As part of the country's proclamation, Hitler outlined Germany's position, which was reported in the United Press News Agency as Germany is ready at any time to conclude continental non-aggression pacts for long periods to serve European peace and cultural reconstruction. In 1934, he further threw off suspicion by signing a non-aggression pact with Poland, and moves like these worked beautifully. Each time the Nazis watered down the treaty, the Allied powers did nothing but offer renegotiation. Only once during this period did Hitler become too ambitious. A union between Austria and Germany was explicitly banned by the treaty. In 1934, he supported Austrian Nazis in an attempted assassination of the Austrian Chancellor. The plan failed and Hitler was forced to deny all knowledge, but few outsiders believed him. Nevertheless, the other powers of Europe did nothing. It was an extraordinary failure that could have undone all Hitler's good work. Germany had little means of defending itself with its army of 100,000 men in 1934, and Hitler knew it. After successfully extracting himself from the situation, Hitler was able to hold an internationally recognized vote in January 1935 on the Saarland, which had been administered by Britain and France since 1920. The Saarland was essential to Germany's industrial output, with a huge amount of the Reich's coal being mined here. Around 90% of the population voted to be a part of Germany, giving a massive boost to the country's economy. Hitler became sufficiently emboldened, and 2 months later he reintroduced conscription. This finally did lead to protests from Britain, France, and Italy, but Hitler managed to smooth the situation over. His peace diplomacy was so successful that he even managed to undermine France by agreeing to a naval treaty with Britain in June of that year. Another domino fell, and Hitler was able to rebuild a significant portion of Germany's navy. But perhaps his crowning achievement came in March 1936. The Rhineland was a territory in Western Germany that was supposed to be demilitarized under the terms of the Versailles Treaty. When France and the Soviet Union formed a pact, Hitler seized upon this opportunity. Against the advice of his own generals, he marched the German army into the Rhineland in the most direct violation of the treaty yet. France and Britain protested but ultimately did nothing. Years later, it emerged that even Hitler knew this was a gamble. According to the sources we have, it was revealed that if France made any move to prevent Germany from reoccupying the Rhineland, German soldiers had orders to immediately retreat. Such a move would have severely damaged Hitler's image of invincibility, but France still feared war with Germany, and without Britain they were unwilling to act, and so Hitler gained what he wanted. Hitler's plans outlined in Mein Kampf continued into the following year. After Italy's invasion of Abyssinia, which is today modern-day Ethiopia, Britain and France imposed sanctions. This move brought Fascist Italy closer to Germany, and in October 1936 the Rome-Berlin Axis was established. Hitler would take this further with the Anti-Comintern Pact against the Soviet Union, and in 1937 the alliance between Germany, Italy and Japan was established, formalizing the Axis powers. On the mainland, Hitler had established Germany as the primary power in Europe in less than 4 years. Hitler now felt confident enough to construct his plan for conquest, which he would formalize in November 1937, and it would begin with Austria and Czechoslovakia. In February of 1938, he forced Vienna to include Austrian Nazis in its government. Despite their resistance, Hitler ordered an invasion of Austria. To their surprise, Hitler's troops were greeted enthusiastically. It gave him the confidence to conduct a vote on a union with Austria. Hitler won the vote by a landslide and paraded through Vienna in the back of an open-top car. Meanwhile, Britain and France offered no protest. With Austria secured, Hitler now had the green light to proceed with the next part of his plan for European conquest. Around the same time, Hitler assured Czechoslovakia that his union with Austria wouldn't impact Germany's relations with the country. Secretly, he was already planning to carve them up. He ordered the leader of the German minority in the Sudetenland, Konrad Henlein, to begin agitation actions. The area consisted of most of the country's industrial output, meaning its absorption would effectively cripple Czechoslovakia. Henlein, at Hitler's command, made impossible demands. This resulted in a showdown where the country knew it couldn't defend itself, and so they appealed to Britain and France for help. But even the Allies knew they had no means to defend the landlocked region if Hitler forced the issue. So they accepted Hitler's demands, believing his claims that this was his final territorial claim in Europe. In this case, Mussolini was instrumental in securing Hitler's demand by acting as a channel with the British. Again, France refused to intervene militarily without Britain, and Hitler knew it. After a meeting with the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, the Sudetenland was declared an official German territory. Czechoslovakia wasn't consulted and was forced into accepting the decision. This incredible weakness of the Allies further emboldened Hitler. He would occupy the rest of Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1939, with little resistance, declaring it a German protectorate. A few days later, Hitler also bullied Lithuania into giving Germany the territory of Memel, close to the northern border of East Prussia. At this stage, little could have been done to deter Hitler. For years, his every demand had been met by Britain and France. With such weakness on show, it should have come as no surprise that Hitler's spectacular successes only encouraged him to go further. In the late spring of 1939, Hitler established a formal military pact with Italy, known as the Pact of Steel. He also demanded Danzig from Poland, previously a German city until the end of the First World War. Poland refused and relied on its security guarantees from Britain and France, but Hitler had yet another card to play. On August 23, 1939, the Nazi-Soviet Pact was signed, which was a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. Nobody saw it coming, and it remains the greatest diplomatic bombshell in modern history. With Poland now trapped between Germany and the Soviet Union, the security guarantees from the Allies were now meaningless. It was this move that finally awoke the world to the threat they faced from Hitler. In the weeks after the invasion of Poland, the New York Times would write in an editorial, "Hitlerism is brown communism, Stalinism is red fascism. The world will now understand that the only real ideological issue is one between democracy, liberty, and peace on the one hand, and despotism, terror, and war on the other." What's interesting about this period is Hitler's repeated foreign policy successes. Hitler had barely stepped foot outside of the German-speaking world. He spoke no foreign language, yet his every gamble had succeeded. Now, Poland was doomed. Britain and France soon declared war on September 3, 1939, being unable to allow Hitler to absorb any more of Europe. Officially, the conflict we now know as the Second World War had begun. More glory for the Fuhrer of Nazi Germany stood waiting in the years to come. However, Hitler's track record of success was a mere 6 years away from crumbling into dust. So there we have it. If you have any comments, criticisms, or corrections, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.